In just 43 seconds, one of Hollywood's most respected actors would unleash a verbal assault so devastating that it would leave Joy Behar speechless, the studio audience gasping, and producers scrambling to cut to commercial. What started as Tom Hardy promoting his latest film quickly devolved into the most explosive confrontation in The View's history, with the British actor systematically dismantling the host's credibility before storming off set in a blaze of fury. The tension was palpable from the moment Hardy walked onto the set, fresh off promoting Venom: The Last Dance. The notoriously private actor had already made it clear through his publicist that he wouldn't be discussing his personal life or political views. But Joy Behar, never one to respect boundaries, had other plans. "Tom, welcome to The View." Behar began with that trademark smirk that guests had learned to fear. "Before we talk about your new movie, I have to ask about your comments regarding the current political climate in Hollywood. You've been quite vocal about staying out of politics, but don't you think actors have a responsibility to use their platform?" Hardy's jaw visibly tightened. He'd specifically requested that politics be off limits. Yet here was Behar, barely 30 seconds into the interview, already pushing buttons. "I'm here to talk about Venom," he replied curtly, his London accent cutting through the studio air like a blade. "That's what I agreed to discuss." "Oh, come on, Tom," Behar pressed, leaning forward with that predatory gleam in her eye. "You can't just ignore what's happening in the world. Your silence on certain issues speaks volumes. Some might say you're being cowardly." The word cowardly hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Hardy's co-hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the approaching storm. Whoopi Goldberg shot Behar a warning look, but it was too late. The fuse had been lit. Hardy's face transformed, the easygoing promotional smile replaced by something far more dangerous. "Cowardly?" he repeated slowly, his voice dropping to that menacing whisper that had made him famous in films like Bronson and The Dark Knight Rises. "That's an interesting word choice, Joy." Behar, either oblivious to the warning signs or deliberately ignoring them, doubled down. "Well, when you refuse to speak out against injustice, what else would you call it? You have millions of fans who look up to you, and you choose to stay silent. That's not very brave, is it?" The studio audience, initially excited to see the beloved actor, now sat in uncomfortable silence. They could feel the electricity in the air. The way Hardy's entire demeanor had shifted from promotional charm to barely contained rage. His publicist, visible in the wings, was making frantic cutting motions across her throat, but the cameras kept rolling. "You want to talk about bravery?" Hardy asked, his voice still eerily calm but with an edge that could cut glass. "Let's talk about the brave choice to ambush a guest who came here in good faith. Let's discuss the courage it takes to ignore explicit requests from someone's representatives about what topics are off limits." Behar's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered, but Hardy had seen it. Like a predator sensing weakness, he leaned forward slightly. "Or perhaps we should examine the bravery required to make someone's livelihood dependent on their willingness to parrot your personal political beliefs." "Now wait just a minute," Behar began, but Hardy wasn't finished. "No, Joy, you wait," he interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. "You brought up cowardice, so let's really dive into it. What would you call someone who uses their platform to bully guests into uncomfortable situations? Someone who hides behind the pretense of journalism while really just pushing their own agenda?" The other co-hosts were frozen, caught between their loyalty to Behar and their obvious discomfort with her tactics. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair, while Sunny Hostin kept glancing toward the producers off stage. Behar, her face reddening, shot back, "I'm asking legitimate questions that the public wants to know. If you can't handle tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." "Tough questions?" Hardy laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what we're calling ambush journalism now? Tough questions would be about my craft, my preparation for roles, the challenges of bringing complex characters to life. What you're doing is tabloid harassment, masquerading as legitimate inquiry." The audience was completely silent now, some members visibly uncomfortable with the escalating confrontation. This wasn't the light-hearted celebrity chat they'd expected when they'd lined up at 5 a.m. for tickets. "You signed up for this when you became a public figure," Behar retorted, her voice getting shriller. You can't pick and choose what parts of fame you want to deal with. Hardy's eyes narrowed dangerously. Actually, Joy, I can. And I did. Through my representatives weeks ago when we agreed to the parameters of this appearance. But apparently, your word isn't worth much, is it? The tension in the studio was now suffocating. Camera operators were getting conflicting signals. Some producers wanted them to keep rolling for the explosive content, while others were signaling for a commercial break. But the confrontation was escalating too quickly to stop. My word? Behar's voice cracked with indignation. You come on my show and try to dictate the terms? This isn't how it works, pal. Your show? Hardy's voice was pure venom now. That's rich. Last I checked, this was supposed to be a collaborative discussion between professionals. But I guess professionalism went out the window the moment you decided my privacy was less important than your ratings. As the heated exchange continued to escalate, it became clear that this was no longer just a disagreement about interview boundaries. This was about to become something much more explosive, and neither Hardy nor Behar seemed willing to back down. Behar, her face now flushed with anger and embarrassment, made the fatal mistake of going personal. You know what, Tom? Maybe the problem isn't me asking questions. Maybe the problem is that you're just another pretty boy actor who can't handle real scrutiny. All muscle and no substance. The studio went dead silent. Even the camera operators stopped moving. Hardy's entire body language shifted, his shoulders squaring as he slowly turned to face Behar directly. When he spoke, his voice was so low and controlled that the boom operators had to strain to pick it up. Pretty boy, he repeated, each word dripping with dangerous calm. Is that your professional assessment, Joy? Because I'm curious about your qualifications to judge substance. Behar, realizing she might have crossed a line but too proud to retreat, pressed forward. I've been in this business longer than you've been alive, kid. I know substance when I see it, and right now, I'm seeing a tantrum. Hardy's laugh was cold and mirthless. You've been in show business, Joy. There's a difference. What you do isn't journalism. It's gossip dressed up with studio lighting and a live audience. You're basically a tabloid with better production values. The other co-hosts were now actively trying to intervene. Whoopi attempted to jump in with, "Let's all take a breath here." But both Hardy and Behar were locked in their verbal death spiral, neither willing to be the first to blink. "How dare you?" Behar shot back, her voice rising to a near shriek. "I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, Nobel Prize winners. You make movies about comic book characters." Hardy's response was surgical in its precision. And yet, despite all those impressive interviews, here you are, trying to manufacture drama by attacking a guest who came here to talk about his work. Tell me, Joy, when was the last time one of those world leaders agreed to come back after you ambushed them? The question hit its mark. Behar's mouth opened and closed soundlessly for a moment, clearly struggling with how to respond. Her producer was now frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, but she seemed oblivious to everything except the man dismantling her credibility in real time. "You arrogant piece of—" Behar started, but Hardy cut her off with a raised hand. "Careful now," he warned, his voice carrying the full weight of his theatrical training. "We're on live television, though I suspect your audience is getting exactly the kind of show they tuned in for, just not the one they expected." The audience was now completely silent, some members looking genuinely shocked at what they were witnessing. This wasn't the playful celebrity banter they'd come for. This was a full-scale character assassination happening in real time. Sarah Haynes finally found her voice, attempting damage control. "Maybe we should talk about the new Venom movie." "Oh no," Hardy interrupted, never taking his eyes off Behar. Joy wanted to have a real conversation. "Let's have one. Tell me, Joy, what drives someone to build a career on making guests uncomfortable? Is it the power trip, or are you just genuinely incapable of conducting a respectful interview?" Behar's face was now completely red. "You don't get to come on my show and insult me." "Security!" "Your show again," Hardy noted with bitter amusement. "And there it is. When you can't win with words, you resort to intimidation. Very professional." But Hardy wasn't done. He turned slightly toward the cameras, addressing the audience directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing exactly why so many actors refuse to appear on programs like this. This isn't journalism. This is harassment for entertainment value." The production assistant had appeared at the edge of the stage, clearly unsure whether to approach or wait for clearer instructions. The other co-hosts looked mortified, caught between their loyalty to their colleague and their obvious discomfort with her behavior. Behar, perhaps realizing how badly this was going, tried to regain control. "If you don't like the questions, you can leave any time." Hardy smiled for the first time since the confrontation began, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Is that your solution to difficult conversations, Joy? Just tell people to leave? No wonder your show has such a reputation in Hollywood." "What reputation?" she demanded, though her voice cracked slightly. "The one where agents warn their clients about coming here," Hardy replied smoothly. "The one where publicists specifically request other venues because they know this isn't actually an interview show. It's a trap disguised as entertainment." The revelation hung in the air like a bomb. Even the other co-hosts looked stunned, as if they'd never considered that their show might have that kind of reputation behind the scenes. Behar's mouth fell open, clearly not expecting Hardy to be so blunt about the industry's perception of her program. That's not true," she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" Hardy challenged, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of someone who knew he held all the cards. "When was the last time a major star came on here without their publicist specifically requesting topics be off limits? When was the last time someone left here talking about what a pleasant, professional experience it was?" The silence stretched uncomfortably as Behar struggled to formulate a response. Her co-hosts were now openly uncomfortable, some looking down at their note cards as if hoping to disappear. The studio audience seemed frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing great television or a career-ending meltdown. "You're being ridiculous," Behar finally managed, but her voice sounded weak and defensive rather than authoritative. Hardy shook his head slowly. "No, Joy. What's ridiculous is that you've built a career on making people uncomfortable and then acting surprised when they push back. What's ridiculous is that you think being on television gives you license to ignore basic human decency." The confrontation had now reached a fever pitch, with Hardy methodically dismantling not just Behar's interview style, but her entire professional reputation. And as the tension continued to build, it became clear that something was about to break completely. Behar, backed into a corner and losing control of her own show, made one final, desperate attempt to regain the upper hand. "You know what? I've had enough of your attitude. This is exactly the kind of toxic masculinity that's ruining Hollywood. You can't handle a strong woman asking real questions." The accusation hung in the air like a slap. Hardy's eyes narrowed to slits, and for a moment, the entire studio held its breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet that everyone had to lean forward to hear him. "Toxic masculinity?" he repeated slowly. "That's your defense? You ambush me, ignore agreements made in good faith, insult my intelligence, call me names, and when I respond with facts about your professional conduct, you hide behind gender politics?" Hardy stood up slowly, his imposing frame casting a shadow over the desk. The security guard took a step forward, but Hardy held up a hand, his movement controlled and deliberate. "Don't worry," he said without looking away from Behar. "I'm not going anywhere near her. I wouldn't want to give her any more ammunition for her victim narrative." "Sit down," Behar demanded, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You don't get to intimidate me on my own show." "Intimidate you?" Hardy's laugh was genuinely incredulous. "Joy, the only thing I'm doing is standing up, which apparently qualifies as intimidation in your world. Tell me, is this how you plan to spin this? The big scary man frightened poor little Joy Behar?" Whoopi Goldberg finally found her voice, trying desperately to salvage the situation. "Tom, maybe we should all just—" "No, Whoopi," Hardy interrupted, his tone respectful but firm. "Your colleague here wanted a real conversation. She wanted to see what happens when she pushes someone past their breaking point. Well, congratulations, Joy. You got your moment." Behar was now visibly shaking with rage and humiliation. "Get him off my stage. Get him out of here right now." "Your stage?" Hardy shook his head in disbelief. "Even now, even after everything we've just discussed, you still think this is all about you. This is a television studio, Joy, not your personal kingdom. But don't worry, I'm leaving." He began to remove his microphone with practiced ease, his movements calm and controlled, in stark contrast to Behar's hysteria. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the stunned audience directly, "I apologize that you had to witness this. You came here expecting entertainment, and instead, you got a masterclass in unprofessional conduct." "Don't you dare!" Behar screamed, her composure completely shattered. "Don't you dare turn this around on me!" Hardy paused in removing his mic, looking at her with something approaching pity. "I don't need to turn anything around, Joy. You've done all the work for me. Everyone in this studio, everyone watching at home, they can see exactly what kind of person you are. They can see how you treat guests, how you react when someone stands up to you." The other co-hosts sat in mortified silence, clearly wanting to disappear. The audience was completely quiet, many looking shocked and uncomfortable at what they were witnessing. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a public humiliation. "You think you're so much better than me?" Behar's voice was now hoarse from shouting. "You're just another Hollywood pretty boy who thinks his shit doesn't stink. And there it is," Hardy said softly, finally finishing with his microphone and placing it carefully on his chair. "When all else fails, resort to profanity and personal attacks. Very professional, Joy. Really shows that legendary experience you were bragging about." He turned toward the wings, then paused, looking back at the cameras one final time. "To anyone considering appearing on this program, let this be your warning. This woman has no respect for agreements, no respect for boundaries, and clearly no respect for basic human decency. You've been warned." Behar, completely unhinged now, stood up from her chair. "Don't you walk away from me. We're not finished here." Hardy stopped and turned around slowly, his expression deadly serious. "Oh, but we are finished, Joy. We're very finished. Because, unlike you, I know when a conversation has run its course. I know when to walk away from something toxic." "Security!" Behar screamed again, though no one seemed sure what exactly she wanted them to do since Hardy was already leaving voluntarily. "Save your breath," Hardy called over his shoulder as he reached the edge of the stage. "I'm already gone. But do me a favor. When you're editing this for broadcast, make sure you leave it all in. Let America see exactly who Joy Behar really is when the cameras are rolling." As Hardy disappeared into the wings, the studio erupted in chaos. Some audience members were applauding, whether for Hardy's exit or the drama they'd witnessed, it was impossible to tell. Others sat in stunned silence, clearly processing what they'd just seen. The remaining co-hosts looked shell-shocked, unsure how to continue. Behar, left standing alone at the desk, looked around wildly as if expecting someone to come to her defense. But her co-hosts were avoiding eye contact. The audience was murmuring amongst themselves, and the production staff was in full crisis mode. "Well," she finally managed, her voice still shaking, "I guess we know what kind of man Tom Hardy really is." But even as she said it, the words rang hollow in the studio. Everyone had seen the confrontation unfold. They'd watched her ignore his reasonable requests, escalate the situation with personal attacks, and then completely lose control when he fought back with facts instead of insults. A production assistant appeared at her elbow, whispering urgently about going to commercial. Behar nodded numbly, suddenly looking older and smaller than she had at the beginning of the show. As the commercial break sign lit up, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. Tom Hardy hadn't just walked off The View. He'd systematically destroyed Joy Behar's credibility in front of a live studio audience and millions of viewers. He'd exposed her tactics, her unprofessionalism, and her complete inability to handle pushback with grace. The aftermath in the studio was telling. Audience members were pulling out their phones, clearly eager to share what they'd witnessed. The other co-hosts huddled together, whispering frantically. And Joy Behar stood alone at the desk, the reality of her public humiliation finally starting to register on her face. In just under 20 minutes, what was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance had turned into one of the most devastating takedowns in daytime television history. Tom Hardy had walked into The View as a guest and walked out having delivered a masterclass in how to handle a bully with intelligence, restraint, and absolutely devastating precision.